Hi, everyone. My name is Lolita, and I'm a director of creatives here at Supersonic. Today, with my amazing colleague Dasha, who is managing our prototype team of motion designers, we will talk about one of the for sure hottest and, on the other hand, one of the most controversial topics, creatives and how to reach this magic low CPI for your prototype. Both me and Dasha have come to this amazing creative world after running and managing user acquisition campaigns across actually all existing networks for years, which of course helps us to know the specifics of algorithms kind of like from the inside and basically build this data-driven approach for our creative strategy. But no time to talk. I'm just giving the mic to Dasha to kickstart.
Hey there. So first of all, thanks Lolita for introduction. And it's a pleasure to attend this session today. And as Lolita mentioned, today we're going to talk about basic best practices. We also will answer frequently asked questions that a lot of developers ask us. And also Lolita will share the hottest, the newest case study, which I'm going to keep as intriguing. And in the end of the session, we will have Q&A session where you can answer your question. However, before moving to the best practices, I would like to share with you what we do in Supersonic here in terms of creatives. So we have two super talented creative teams. The first one is prototype team, who focuses on the creatives that we produces for the initial testing. So we're focusing only on the reducing the CPI. And we work closely with developers and trying to find creative approach in order to move the games to another stages, where the published creative team focuses on scaling our games. So altogether, we produce over 5K unique creative monthly, which I would say, just try to imagine what amount of knowledge and data we are relying on our session today. So let's start with basic best practices. And when it comes to creative or hyper-casual games, gameplay is a key. So try to focus on the clarity of the mechanic of your game, controls, and goals. For example, you can have a good contrast between the key elements. You can have a really good animation of your character. You can have amazing level design. But after watching the ads, your users might keep the main mechanic, control, and goal. Otherwise, you will lose your potential user. So what we recommend is to try and summarize the idea of your game in one sentence. Can you get it after 5 seconds of watching of ads? If so, your creative is already good. So let's take a look at examples. On the first one, we have Bridge Race. So I would summarize the idea of this game as collect the bricks to build a bridge in order to make it faster than your opponent. And if we speak about the latest hit, Tallman Run, I would summarize the idea of this game as pass the gates to improve your character to beat the boss. So as far as you can see, it can work quite well. And also, when we speak about gameplay, it's really important to keep the good visual impact after each action at a time. So bonus levels with collecting coins and diamonds definitely can have a good satisfying effects, right? But most important things that our users can get the main mechanics. So try to keep focus on the main mechanics, and at the same time, you can see at the screen with the example of Pro Builder that our users collecting the bricks, and it's good when you can show to the users how much they already collected and how much bigger the house became. And also when we speak about runner games, let's say Tallman Run, it's really important to see how much difference our character became. For example, smaller, bigger, or taller. So every action should be changed significantly. And let's move to colors. If you would like to have a game that will have a good potential to be marketability, it's better to have bright cartoonish color in order to reach a broader audience. Because let's say that dark and so-called dirty colors can make our audience narrow. Let's say not all females find aggressive red or brown as attractive, as well as the youngest audience and players don't buy the pastel colors and sharp shadows. So top performing colors aren't the only option for sure. It's just the example for you to compare what can work best. And let's take a look at examples. At the first one, we just change the color a little bit, but by making it brighter. And you can see that it also gives a good contrast between the platform, environment, and character, which help us to reduce the CPI by 38%. And in the second example, we try to make the color more cartoonish, and we also use the stereotype about female colors. As our main character is girl, we decided to try pink car, just in case to keep the female style. And you also can see that we make the icon a little bit bigger, so it helps us to keep a visual impact after each player's choice. And let's move to contrast. I already mentioned that it's really important to have a good contrast between key elements as your character, platform, environment, and enemies. In the first example, you also can see that we trying to use simple associations with the red color, as we use red enemies, which highlights the danger. And it also can help us to reduce the CPI. As you can see in this specific case, it helps us to reduce it by 23%. So let's talk about the camera. We recommend you to try zoom in your gameplay a little bit, just in case to keep the attention at a single action per time. Because if you take a look at the left example, you can notice that users must to move their eyes from one object to another one, and it's kind of complicated to get the core mechanic and to see the whole pictures. So what we recommend is just trying to zoom in a bit, and it definitely will help to keep this focus on every action of the users. And also you can try different camera angle just in order to find the best position of the camera that's reflecting your games, but make sure that a new camera angle provide users with a new gameplay experience and improve the clarity of your gameplay. If it doesn't, it's better just to focus on the new gameplay scenarios and new videos instead. Especially this point really relevant for puzzle games because when we are changing the camera there, it doesn't get us the new feelings of the game, right? Yeah, it could be look a little bit different in the visual style, but anyway, we don't feel something new here. So yeah, just try to do this for runners games or idle games, or probably even puzzle games, but not all of them. And when you speak about character position, try to place your main character not in the center of gameplay. Try to put it under the user's finger, which is called like a playable zone. Yeah, it could sound like a really small point, but it's definitely worth to try, especially when you make the screen recording of your videos and then you are cutting it. So try to cut the below part of your videos in order to put your character not in the center, but in the below part of the video. So as we started to speak a little bit about resizing of the video, I would like to keep going with aspect ratio. So many publishers, not only Supersonic for sure, use Facebook for their initial task and for the following iteration. So it's really important to have a good resize, I would say the right resize of your videos. So when you make the screen recording of your game, don't forget to resize it to 4 and 5. just in order to prevent the after resizing by Facebook, because sometimes it can look really worse on users' Instagram or Facebook feeds, because Facebook doing it randomly, and it can just cut the main element of your gameplay. Like in this example, we see that Facebook cut the part of our main character, which is not good actually. But also when you make the resizes, trying to keep in mind that we don't need to use blur or black frames. In order with this, it's better to zoom in your gameplay a bit. But at the same time, you should keep in mind that you don't need to cut the main elements of your gameplay. So that's basically it regarding the best practices. And now we are going to answer the most frequently asked question. So Lalita, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Dasha, for amazing tips. As you all guys know, we are working closely with like all developers, and we are getting a lot of questions like what color to use, what is the best color, which environment to choose, which level to record, and so on and so forth. So I'll try to summarize the most asked questions and give you some answers. And we will start with question number one by the amount of requests we've got. Do we need to add a hand? And the answer is kind of coming from the gameplay itself you have, because you do need a hand indeed in most of the puzzle games. Why? Because a hand makes the control much, much more clear in puzzles, simply just easier to get it right. And in cases where you cannot focus users' eyes or like attention on a character or precise actions you need, like for example, you can do on the Dash example with ideal arcade games, a hand really can focus users like again eyes or attention on needed actions. In average, talking about numbers, it helps to reduce your CPI by around 15 to 20%, which is like in my opinion quite a lot considering how easy this stuff is, right? Moreover, there is no big difference in terms of what precisely pointer / hand to use. It could be cartoon, it could be realistic, it could be beige or white, whatever. It's more about like the value it gives rather than about how it looks. Also, there is actually no need to add a hand or a pointer to most of the runner games, as the mechanic on those is quite easy to understand, to get simply by looking on your like main character, in this case a ball. Moreover, in some games, it might even steal attention, in my opinion, what is exactly happening here in going balls. And otherwise, basically, eventually, might cause an increase in your CPI. Another question is, do we need to add a call to action button like play, download, whatever? My answer actually might cause some disagreement in the market, I know it, but I base it on a big variety of tests on a lot of types of games. And no, you really don't need to add any kind of buttons while watching the video or at the end of your video. I'll explain you why. This practice of adding this kind of buttons like play, download came from mid-core games many, many years ago, when it was quite common to use these fancy animations and basically animated cartoons instead of showing any kind of gameplays, including, by the way, these misleading ads that are now kind of for a few latest years popular across like match-3 games, etc. And by watching those cartoons, it was kind of hard to understand for users, is it like a real game or is it just a cartoon that you need to watch? And creators of those just started to add these buttons, like, for example, play, in order to highlight that it's not a cartoon, but a real game, and users can, first of all, download it, and secondly, play it. Talking, of course, about hyper-casual industry, when from the ad, there is no way you cannot understand that it's actually a game. There is no need to add any kind of buttons. Moreover, on Facebook and TikTok, videos are not clickable. You also should remember it. By forcing users to click on the screen, you won't get any clicks at all, like real clicks. And another point, to convince you that you really don't need it, that both TikTok and Facebook add real buttons below your videos. So truly, no need to focus on this at all. Another question, do we need to test different visual effects? And my answer is nope, you really don't. Again, explain you why. Please just remember that testing your prototype, your game, especially when we're talking about very first stages, you usually have quite a limited amount of ad space in your campaigns. So I strongly recommend you to focus on just clear colors, bright colors, high contrast. Of course, those kind of effects might work. It's true. Sometimes it happens. Everything happens when we're talking about gaming and especially hyper casual. Although, first of all, we see it's becoming more like an anti-trend now over the last year or so. And what is more important, that in order to find just one effect that will work for your game, and by work, I mean will cause some kind of decrease in your CPI by, let's say, at least 5%, let's take the minimum, you truly need to test hundreds of them. So now think, is it really worth it, or you can invest time in creating new level or just recording new level for what you have already? Another question, do we need to test different environments? So for hyper casual games specifically, of course, you know it already, gameplay is a key. It's like a heart of your low CPI. And talking about environments, they should just, make sense within your game universe. They just should support your game rules. So they for sure shouldn't stall any attention, of course, any additional questions in users' heads. So talking about very early stages, I recommend you to stick with something just, clean, something simple, like, for example, city, forest, water, or even one color background. So those are absolutely like win-wins that you can always use and with no lose. But if you ask me to name you, let's call it anti-top of environments that I do not recommend you to use, I actually easily can name you literally same one color background, same city, same forest. So as you can see on the example on the screen, it's not about the precise theme, but more about how this theme look and kind of live within your gameplay. You know already that bright colors, high contrast, so it's always good for your hyper casual game. So keep it in mind, and just alongside with broad thematic, it will help you for sure to bring low CPI. Another thing that might help with your CPI is actually icons. Out of all ICO materials, icons are the most impactful element. But realistically, looking at prototypes, there is no actually need to conduct real serious A/B tests during this stage, since the amount of users, at least usually the amount of users that we are getting during the very, very early stages is not big. So just stick with best practices while creating the icons for your game, and you for sure will be good. And the tips are, as you can see, are quite similar to what we have for the videos and any other creatives. Bright colors, high contrast, so it's a must. It always show higher CVR from what we see. And remember that users actually see icons on a very small screens, on very tiny, I would say, squares on their phones. So elements, of course, should be a bit exaggerated to be understandable and easy to read from phones. And in my opinion, the most crucial part and the tip that always actually leads to CVR improvement is relevance to your gameplay. So don't be afraid of showing literally your core mechanic inside the icon. It always help you to increase your CVR. So just try it. And the last part of our today's talk with you guys is a short case study about one of the recent launches we had recently. It's about how important it is to think outside the box and try multiple variants. So Tolman Run, it's a game that has been published by us 2.5 months ago, and it's still doing amazing at top chart, super steady, looking amazing. And as you all know, being at top charts, especially for so long, can see incremental growth day by day in terms of the amount of installs and revenue eventually. Of course, it's always about thinking outside the box. It's always about looking for new ideas and come up with these new ideas. So let's just look together at this example of Tolman Run. There are usually two main things when you watch the creatives and play the game. So it's, of course, the gameplay, which is how we play the level in ads. Do we fail? Do we win? So it's always something that you need to test. and the mechanic. In this case, it's for Tolman run, it's gain and lose mechanic. But what is defining this mechanic? It's gates, right? In this game, I'm talking about Tolman run example. So we decided to focus on that and started to think how to make this mechanic even more understandable, even more satisfying, even more clear. So looking at the gameplay, and you can see two GIFs on the screen, I see few things that, in my opinion, not helping at all this gameplay. It causes like more questions in my head, and I believe in users' head than answers. First of all, I don't see a clear and like super satisfying gain and lose effect. Secondly, I don't really understand from the first second, do I need to pass the gates? Is it good to pass the gates, or I better to skip them? Like again, is it good to skip them or not? Thirdly, I see some obstacles like after the gates, and they kind of makes, at least for me, harder to understand the gameplay because, for example, being tall, is it like a good thing or a bad thing? Because if I'm tall, probably I will struggle to pass these obstacles, right? So it's not good when we have these questions. And for sync is actually diamond. So I collect them and I don't see any visual impact at all. And Dasha already mentioned how important it is to keep this visual impact all the time after each action. So what we have done, first thing, and I believe the most crucial thing out of all, we focused users precisely on gain and lose mechanic, always providing a choice with not skippable gates, placing them, as you can see on the GIF, alongside to each other. Now, as a user, I have to make a choice. Additionally, by using very simple, very basic associations like green is safe, red is dangerous, we explained to users which gates they kind of like need to pass. So we played with what is, of course, drawn or written inside the gates, and after testing like multiple variants with emojis, texts, numbers, symbols, and so on and so forth, we come up with what is working the best, following the numbers, and look what we've got. Just in 2 months, we have already 40 million installs, and we just started. So stay tuned. So my message to you is just be really open-minded by trying different visuals in your game. As you basically have already a code written for your mechanic, for your game, and tackling simple on the one hand, but on the other hand, so powerful things, you can see like a really drastically different CPI for your prototype. And before we are moving to Q&A, so let's just summarize briefly what are the most, let's say, crucial ingredients, elements for low CPI. So gameplay, absolutely the key of everything. You already know it, so you hear it from everywhere. It's like the most crucial part. Be super focused on this and always pay extra efforts on your mechanic, on how satisfying it looks, how understandable it is, and so on. Right colors, not right, bright colors also right also, and high contrast always help your gameplay to stand out and be more appealing. Environment, so it should just support your game without stealing any attention and causing any questions in users' head. And in general, be open-minded, play with visuals in Unity, creating variables. And with what you have to test in early stages, especially, and eventually it will give you some insight, not only for creatives, but also for your game itself, because you can use, of course, all those tips for creating a game itself as well. Thank you. We are moving to Q&A part, I guess. I think I will stop sharing my screen if you don't mind, so you could see us more clear. Okay, I will open what are the questions we have. Dasha, if you have it already open somewhere or read through some of them, you can start.
Okay. So
water.
That's a really interesting question in our chat. So the first one, okay, should I add hooks from some viral videos in the first few seconds? So basically, we don't recommend to add any real footage in your gameplay, especially if you're speaking about initial testing. Why that's so? Because it can bring irrelevant results, which can give us a false hopes on the one hand, and on the other hand, you will not be able to scale your game with this kind of creatives due to copyrights. So as you know, the main goal of the especially initial test, I mean the first test on Facebook, for example, it's to test gameplay itself. So for sure, it's better to start gameplay immediately instead of adding any hooks from some viral videos. Yeah. So the next one, hey, could you recommend the best color to have for background?
I can take this one. So first, talking about colors, I actually expected this question. So it really depends what you mean by color, meaning which object we are talking about. Because if we are talking, let's say, about enemies or about obstacles, so like we actually recommended it, like, and recommend all the time, use some simple associations. Like if it's obstacles, so use red color. But talking about backgrounds precisely, so actually, like, there's no right answer, right? Because all the colors are good and everything could work potentially on your game. But in my opinion, from what I see across all the tests, blue and green, always good decisions. So stick with those colors. You always will see good performance. Because even like reading some articles and some surveys and some tests conducting, so blue and green are like one of the most favorite colors across both female and men audience. So they're safe, they're like good to use everywhere. So for background, I believe those are for sure like the best ones to use.
Yeah, I agree with this. What is the best camera angle in runners?
Oh, it's a tricky question. Also, there is, of course, like no right answer to this, because camera angle is basically defining your gameplay, defining camera angle, right? And as Dasha mentioned, it's really about what type of gameplay you have, because in some gameplays we don't even recommend to test camera angle, because again, it doesn't make any sense. But I believe that like when users see the ads, they kind of know in a good way, or with a good camera intuitively, because they see so many games, they play so many games, they see so many ads, and they, how I say it, they're well watched, our users. So in cases where camera like doesn't open in new different looking gameplays, new different looking experiences inside your gameplay, so stick with just reflecting your gameplay in the most understandable way. So users always sense it. They won't be even able to explain maybe like why is this camera good or why is this camera bad, but just make sure that your gameplay is understandable with these camera perspectives. Elements are visible, all the characters and all the objects are like in the playable zone, meaning like under users' fingers, so that your game and eventually creators were like easy to watch and eventually play, and you will be good. So just make sure that everything is like makes sense within your gameplay. What else we have? Is it good to use multiple interesting screen scenes in one creative? I would totally stick with logical gameplay instead of switching like scenes a few times during the video. So as you know, that's one of the important elements is, of course, we discussed it, is of course like gameplay logic while watching the video, and how users like understand this logic while watching the ad. So less interruptions you have, more logic you have inside your gameplay. So of course the better it is, and more interruptions you have, eventually the higher CPI you will get. So I believe, talking about hyper casual industry, there is like no need to test those things, especially during first stages. So we are talking about the prototype stage.
I also see a really interesting question. Will the text on the top of the video voiceover will work especially for adult arcade? So from my perspective, if we're speaking about the first initial testing, especially on Facebook, it's not so important to have the text on the top of the videos. It could help sometimes to clarify the goal of the game, but honestly, it will not reduce the CPI significantly. But if we speak about voiceover, we've noticed that it works really good on TikTok and on Google Ads. So yeah, it works to try this, but probably I will leave it to the next iteration where we are moving to the next stages, right? Because yeah, for the first initial test, it's better to focus only on gameplay itself. And what else we have?
Should we have longer ads, like 25 seconds or more, or shorter one, 15 seconds or less?
I would say that the best practice is to use videos lengths between 15 and 30 seconds. This duration will be feed for many placement as feeds, as stories, as audience network, and it also can work well on other social networks and SDK networks as well. So yeah, just try to keep in mind that the videos lengths between 15 and 30 will be okay.
Keep your video good, so it will lead you to low CPI eventually. So it's not about like the length or how many seconds we show, it's about like the content inside of it. So
yeah, definitely.
What else we have? Do we need to test screenshots and videos on the store page? Like same actually as with icons. So as I said, I believe that icons are the most powerful element out of all ACOR, because it's basically the first thing that users see when they be sent to the store. So for videos and screenshots, of course, not a lot of users scrolling their phones. So again, talking about very early stage, meaning like proto stage, I don't recommend you like to conduct A/B tests and test like videos and screenshots. Just stick with multiple, like 3 to 5 different looking, at least color-wise, because I believe not a lot of content inside the game that you can like screenshot. So just use something simple, different colors, like 3 to 5 screenshots, and like you will be good for this stage. And afterwards, when your game is published, of course, we are taking care of everything, including screenshots.
Yeah. Should we use sounds effects in the videos? So as I mentioned before, if you are testing it on another social networks as TikTok, for example, or Google or Snapchat, for sure, it's important to have these sound effects. But if we speak about the Facebook testing, for sure, you can try to add this, but as we mentioned before, the main part is your gameplay. So just trying to focus how you are screen recording of this game. Is there any feeling that it can provide to the users? Is there any hooks that can trigger them to install the games? Not the sound. It's more about the gameplay and the animation and stuff like that. Oh, I see. Really interesting question, Alita. I guess it's to you. I often see Supersonic ads with real backgrounds, like a skyline, which is definitely not in the game. Is it something we should consider adding, like skyline, nature, and so on?
Good question indeed. So you really should like sense the difference between very first stages of your game, when it's like only like prototype stage, meaning when you test your gameplay and your game, and the stage when your game is scaling. Because when we're talking about being live for over 2 months of your game, so rules and everything, best practices and everything might be very different. Sometimes even like some crazy like black scenarios could potentially work when the game is like 1 year old, 2 years old, etc. Because you see like a lot of Supersonic games are actually doing like amazing at top charts, being like for over than a year ago published. So it's like indeed a matter of which stage we're talking about. So if we're talking about proto stage, so I do not recommend you to test all those stuff. Why? You probably will ask. So we'll answer this as well, because as I mentioned, similar to effects and similar to real life footages and everything, in order to find something that will work, you really need to test hundreds. So it's super, super hard to, find some real life footage or like some effect or like cool background, implement just one, and it will work. So of course it might happen if you're lucky enough, but most of the time you do need to test a lot of things before something will work for your game. So talking about prototypes stage, we recommend you to stick with like very general best practices that will shoot you straight to the needed point, basically low CPI.
Exactly.
I guess we are kind of out of time a bit. So we see our marketing team is doing an amazing job and like writing all the questions that you are typing for us, guys. So thank you for all of them. So I guess we will answer all the questions in Instagram, so stay tuned. So we saved them all. And of course, this session will be also available on YouTube, so you can rewatch if you want or if you miss some parts. And thank you very, very much for listening and all the questions you asked.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today.
Feel free to reach us.